Hello, and welcome to another episode of Fundy Tidings. I'm your host, Jay Remer, and with me today is Alison Smith, New Brunswick's parenting coach. Welcome to the show, Alison.
Always a pleasure, Jay.
It's always good to have you here. We have such interesting talks, and it's so helpful for so many people who are raising children today.
I hope so.
Today's topic is going to be on how we influence our children and how we want to influence them and some of the things that we want to avoid. So at any rate, Alison, how important is it to maintain the connection that we have with our children, on into their teenage years and even after they've left the nest? How important is that?
Well, it depends if we want to stay in our child's life or not. But really, the connection is key for maintaining our influence in their life. It also makes us feel good, and as part of a team, it encourages kids to want to come back to visit over the holidays. And even adult children still need their parents. They still want their guidance and suggestions and to feel heard and valued to their parents. So that's always a need for a child, no matter what age they are. So there are things that we can do as parents that will foster that connection and keep us as a strong influence. And there, like you say, there are some things that can erode some of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that my studies have shown that every move we make in front of our children is recorded for posterity, even if it's done unconsciously, because it does influence us, because it shows the children that whatever the behavior is, they are going to live through it. And if they can live through it, in some ways, it's going to be okay, therefore it must be appropriate and acceptable, which is not always the case. But it's the first thing that goes through a child's mind. So it's very important that how we influence children is measured, so to speak. So what are some of the most important kinds of characteristics or attributes that we can imbue our children with that would be, say, not part of their inherent personality, but sort of social mores?
So some of the things that parents are interested in passing on is their values. Could be their beliefs around a creator. It could be what they find most important. Is it generosity? Is it success? Is it acknowledgement? So every one of us is a little bit different in the values that we hold. We tend to take on some from our culture, we take on some from our parents, and as we age, we start to get reflective on what really are our true values. So it's important for parents to get clear on that. Even in the early years, what do I really value? What do I want to pass on to my children? So it's really individual for each family.
I know that some characteristics are sort of part of the human experience. For instance, the need to connect. That is universally considered a human need. However, there are cultural differences which make the way we do things different from, say, the way things are done in one part of the world to the way they're done in North America. What are some of the red flags or some of the important pieces of influence that we in North America need to watch out for? Because I think that there are differences, and you know how they say about the ugly Americans and the polite Canadians, and all of these different kinds of broad brush cultural things. How do we deal with that as we are in? I mean, how do you suggest that we deal with it with our kids, as far as guiding them, influencing them in healthy ways?
Well, it does start with knowing what is important to us and whether that's the same as the culture around us or not. Lots of conversation around what is important to us and what we see in the world. what do you think about what that person did that you saw on TV? And asking lots of questions. And so we can encourage them to lean toward our values and what we feel is important, but we also want them, and this is maybe a North American value too, to be critical and reflective, but getting them to think about what is really important to them and what they think about things that they see in the world, to help them clarify for themselves what's important.
So establishing communication is really important. And I know in some families, communication can be very minimal. It can be, because I know in some situations children are, it's not as we've referred to this before as a meadow full of wildflowers. It isn't always that way. For one reason or another, there are hardships to deal with. There are huge stresses, and they can come in all different shapes and sizes and forms. So what I'm wondering is how can we allow our children to develop their own personalities, at the same time keeping them safe and encouraging them to carry on, say, cultural traditions that we value?
Well, really that comes back to influence. The more influence we have with them, the more we can guide them and teach them what we know about the world. And things like being polite and how to speak on the phone and things like that. Without them trusting us and wanting to listen to us, our messages will be lost, and they won't be learning as much from us. You see the image of the teenager on their device saying yeah to their parent. They're not listening. And that influence that we have with them really comes back to that connection in the relationship. And part of that really needs to be conversation. We need to be open and upfront and having frequent, routine conversations with our kids about what's going on for them, what's going on for us. Are these things working for us? How can we problem solve? This is a behavior we don't like. Let's see what we can figure out together. All of those kinds of things come together to keep us as a strong influence in their life. And if we're open to listening to them, they're more open to be listening to us. If we consistently prove that we're on their side and at least acknowledge their point of view, then that opens up that communication, so they're open to our guidance and influence.
I think one of the things that parents come to realize at some point is that their children are going to grow up and they're going to change. They're going to turn into adults. They're going to go through adolescence first. Oh joy!
That's a big fear.
and a well-founded fear, because we were all adolescents at one point, and we remember very, very well the sort of the behavioral challenges that we had. So we're always testing boundaries. We're trying this out and trying that out. And some things are a good idea, some things not so good. But nonetheless, because we have been through this, we do naturally have some apprehension and fear about, oh my goodness, I wonder if Sally is going to go through the same thing. Or, you see the typical picture of the father and the first date, like this is not going to happen. Well, these are real fears that are well-founded. And so when you're dealing with a child, say that's 3 or 4 or 5, and you know that they're going to be 15 one day, what kind of long-term goals can you set so that this whole experience is not fraught with stress?
I love that idea of a long-term view of parenting. If we look ahead to the skills and values and abilities we want for our children when they leave the nest, we need to break that down into stages. Okay, so by the age of 14, what do they need to do so that they're ready by the time they're 18 or 30 if they don't leave home till then? And go back even further. So what seeds do I plant now about how to function in the world, how to maintain relationships, how to listen to someone else's point of view, and give them time to practice. And and creating that safe space to make mistakes, to really mess up big time, and know that their parent still is on their side and has their back. Some of the lessons may be uncomfortable for the child to learn, but the parent is still in their corner, and the child feels it, really understands that the parent is doing what they feel is best. And without keeping the lines of communication open, that's really tough to do.
So there's a certain compassion involved there, because as human beings, we have a great tendency to make mistakes. We make mistakes every day.
It's how we learn.
It's how we learn, and we need to learn how to deal with those mistakes without judgment. And so that's where compassion comes in, is there's no judgment. So we're, these bodies having a human experience on the planet, and there are going to be surprises. And there are going to be lots of surprises. It's part of the deal. How do we prepare ourselves as parents to be able to be more aware of the actions that we have, our behaviors, how they influence our children, and how we come to grips with that? Because there are certain behaviors that, for instance, let's just take a simple example like smoking cigarettes. Okay, everybody knows that smoking cigarettes is terrible for you. Even the people who smoke cigarettes will tell you it's terrible for you. That doesn't mean that they're going to necessarily stop. And that's just an example of a number of behaviors that are dangerous. Eating too much chocolate is, So, sorry, did I pluck a nerve?
I think so.
And so how do we deal with that? Because these are real struggles, and the children, our kids watch us handling these struggles, and our adaptability to deal with this is a huge influence in and of itself. So what are your thoughts about that?
Being real with our kids, trusting that they can interact with us on a human level, not just this idea of the powerful parent and the weak child. Being authentic and saying, you know what? I know smoking is bad, and I know you're worried about my health. I'm worried about my health too, but I'm actually addicted to this. And this is why I don't want you to smoke. These are the results I've had because of my addiction. It costs me money, and my clothes are stained, or whatever you want to bring up, age appropriate for the child, of course. But just being real with them and saying, you know what, I'm having a really hard time stopping this. I don't want you to start and have to go through what I'm going through. I want to save you that. So rather than saying, well, just do what I do, or do what I say and not as I do, kids don't buy that. They see through that. But if we're real with them, their trust in us and their respect for us grows. And they won't like it. They may actually start smoking as well. And really, as an influence in their life, we need to recognize that, and we also need to be willing to ask for help and find some ways to make decisions that we want to role model for our children.
Well, it is a challenge for people to be real with themselves, let alone with their children. And one of the questions that I've got, because this gentle parenting concept, which you've developed, which I think is fantastic, punishment is not a focal point in gentle parenting, whereas when I grew up, it was the focal point. So making a transition, how does punishment fit into the whole thing? Is there a need for punishment? I know that there is a school of thought that says we should abolish carrots and sticks completely, that we should just be able to live in a very compassionate, accepting world. Well, we're not there yet. And maybe we're moving in that direction, but instead of slapping a kid for doing something that we judge as negative or wrong, what do we do?
Conversation. I know that sounds very simplistic, but it comes back to that. And as we stay connected with them and focus on our relationship with them before talking about behavior, they're more open to what we have to say. And the more trusting that relationship and two-way that the relationship is, the more influence we have over their decision making and in guiding them. So the punishment actually works against us because it erodes the trust and it erodes the relationship. Anyone who does something negative to us, whether they say it's in love or not, it makes us feel a lot of negative things. And at a young age, a child will even internalize that as them being bad, not their behavior. Even if we say, I don't like your behavior's bad, the child under a certain age, around 7 or 8, will internalize that as them being bad. They can't see it any other way. So we need to be cautious when we're choosing the strategies for helping our kids learn and make their way in the world, that we're not eroding that relationship that we have and that we've worked so hard to build.
One of the things that I have found in the teachings that I do on etiquette is that I always have a reason behind the rule or the guideline. And that seems to make the guideline more palatable, more understandable. So I'm wondering whether or not in raising children, if you have certain guidelines, house rules, cultural traditions, whatever it is, however you run your life, is giving reasons for your corrections, so to speak. Is that helpful in a child understanding, so that you don't have to like beat it into them, you can reason it into them?
That's very, very helpful, and it's something that I teach. Giving the reasons and the explanation is what will help make it stick. Sometimes children aren't ready for the reasoning. Their brains aren't developed to the point where they have full access to the reasoning and logical parts of their brain, especially when emotional and upset. But ultimately, we are again planting those seeds so that they're starting to get it. And as their brain develops and as they're learning and we're supporting them as they learn these lessons, it's becoming easier and easier for them.
I know that there's a tendency today to have smaller families than there used to be. But there still are times when people will have 3 or 4 children, and they will be they'll have these children, well, it doesn't matter, they can have them either within a short amount of time or it can be spread out. These children are all going to be quite different. They're all going to have different personalities. We're not spitting out litters of puppies, and even litters of puppies, the personalities are different from one dog to the next, right? And so with each child that you raise, you're going to be dealing with, there's going to be a point where there's going to be a bit of friction because they're not going to be you. And so if you multiply that out times 4 children, you know, you're a mother and you've got 4 sons, and they're all different, and they're all stress producers for you. What advice have you for parents to cope with this? Because it is something that at some point the straw for the camel's back will come in, and it could turn into quite like I've run out of gas. How can we help parents through this? Because it's got to be challenging.
And regardless how many children someone has, parenting is challenging. It's so personal. It brings up all kinds of stuff from our own past. It challenges us to do more and be more when we have the least amount of sleep and we're tired and overwhelmed and stressed. It's definitely one of the toughest jobs in the world, for sure. It's important to have a social network that we can count on, that is supportive. Taking care of our own needs is not at all selfish, it's imperative, because we all know what happens if we push too hard for too long. We're burnt out, and then we're not the parent that we want to be. So making sure that we do take some time for ourselves, even if it's just 5 minutes to look out the window and breathe. Sometimes in a day, that's all you can do. Other times, you need to know yourself and what fills your cup and what gets you passionate and what keeps you energized. And doing those things on a regular basis, build that into the schedule. That's important. It's also important to be honest with our kids and say, you know what, I'm struggling a bit right now. I'm really tired. Or I've got a lot on my mind. I want you to know it's not you. I'm just having a hard time. Do you think there's something you can do to help? So encouraging them to be part of the team and to contribute to the team is important. Teaching kids life skills, problem solving. And we talked with Lorraine Gilmore-Peters in another show about, and I've totally lost it there. I had a point there. So teaching our kids those life skills so that they can take on some of their own stuff. Teaching them early on that they have a role to play in the family.
How do we, as parents, come to grips with the whole approaching empty nest kind of a situation? Because we have developed these close relationships with our children over the years, and they really are very close bonds. And suddenly, at some point, the children need to start families of their own. They're not going to be hanging on to our apron strings forever, hopefully.
And most good parents don't want that. They
Right.
definitely want them to be able to flourish on their own.
They may want that, but it doesn't mean that it isn't still going to be fraught with challenges. There are going to be emotional pulls that, emotional bonds can be, overwhelmingly strong. And so have you any guidelines for parents how to cope with these? Because you can be very cruel to yourself, and you can be inadvertently unkind to your parents, to your children, and even to your friends, because you can be in such a state of, unrest. Have you any suggestions for parents sort of coping with that?
I can only imagine what a parent would go through. I try to think forward to when my kids will leave the nest. We started late, so they're young. And that's got to be hard on the heart for sure. What I would envision as being helpful is making sure that parents have their own interests. They have their own friends. They have hobbies. There are things that fuel them over and above caring for their children. Keeping the lines of communication open as much as both parties want that to happen. Having an open door policy, letting them know, you can always come home. You can always call if you need something, and relying on our social networks. For sure.
Some of the anxiety probably stems from sort of a feeling of a sense of doubting that we've done everything that we should have done to prepare them for the big wide world. What are some of the skills that you find that people kind of overlook or could emphasize more so that they would feel more comfortable with their children going out into the world, and that their children would feel more confident?
One thing that is getting a bit more attention now, but needs a whole lot more, is emotional awareness, emotional maturity. And we're getting better at looking at the mental health side of things and the psychological health. But the emotions seem to be one of the last things that we focus on in our world. And those really are foundational skills for operating in a workplace, for being in a relationship, for becoming parents themselves. So understanding ourselves and emotions and how those play into our thoughts and our beliefs and what effect it has on others, all of those kinds of things, learning to manage big emotions, being okay with big emotions and sitting with them and finding ways to cope with those, expressing ourselves, all of those skills are critical for being successful in the world. in my opinion. So if we can do more of that, even from early on, and build on that as we go through the years with our kids,
Yeah.
that will serve them very well.
It sounds like a subject for another show.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean a whole show unto itself.
Yes.
Alison, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on influencing our children and how we can be better at it, and the kinds of things that we can expect as we go through. This is really, I'm sure, very helpful for all of our viewers. And thank you all for watching another episode of Fundy Tidings, and we'll see you again sometime soon.